Are you tired of people always telling you what you want to hear and not what you need to hear? Me too. Are you ready to actually do something about it? Hi, I'm Lauren Lahav, and for the past 30 plus years, I've been blessed to speak and to impact thousands of people around the world. I've shared the stage with the world's top thought leaders, including Barbara Walters, Tony Robbins, Barbara Corcoran, and Gary Vaynerchuk. I'm also a personal development, lifestyle, and business coach, event producer, and entrepreneur with businesses in over 25 countries. I'm a wife and a proud mama to 3 and a bonus mom to 1. Trust me when I tell you, it took me many years of buying into my old story of I'm not enough and lots of grit to finally let go of the BS. So I understand firsthand what it means and what it took. They don't call it the School of Hard Knocks for nothing. This podcast is my way of breaking down the BS filters of what we say, what we do, and how we interact with others. I will be sharing what worked for me, yet more importantly, what didn't work for me. This is a no fluff podcast where we will address real life issues that seem to surface when you least expect it, relationship conflict and breakdowns, and real solutions. I will share from my life experiences and those of other everyday heroes, as well as the world's top experts, are all here to help you grow through the process of letting go and finally expressing your true voice, who you are and what you stand for. In a world of political correctness and living our lives on social media, it's hard to know what is real. And are you taking in so much information but not applying what you've learned? In my life, I always look to the people who understand what I'm going through and are willing to get honest and forthcoming with me to help me grow through these challenges. Trust me, I've had them all, and I'm going to take the time to be as real as possible and get to solutions. I've had financial issues, parenting issues, marriage issues, emotional issues. You know, the list goes on. I've learned from my challenges, I've grown from them, and continue to learn from them. I see them now as opportunities. With this podcast, we're going to tune up our lives. I'll be your cup of espresso to get you through whatever you're going through in your life that's holding you back, to give you that confidence and trust of knowing someone is there to help and guide you. Yet you have to do the work. So strap in, hang on tight, and let's get real. All right. Well, you know what? I am so excited to be back because I've taken about a month of not doing my podcast, and it's crazy because I've been very consistent over the past 4 years, but I think that there was a reason why, and that was because I wanted to come back with a bang with something that's going to blow people's mind and meet a very special soul. So you're it, BJ. You are what they have been waiting for. I got to say, you are just probably one of the most amazing souls I've ever met. And I am very, very grateful to V to have, introduced us. So welcome,
Me too,
welcome.
Thank you,
Dr.
Mama.
BJ Miller. I'm not going to give you the formal info because I'm like, what do you want to do? I sent you the whole questionnaire and you're like, hey, let's just keep it real and raw. And that's, as you know, that's how I really like it. So let's talk, because you share about, I know all that you've done with regards to, you've been a palliative care physician, but I know your real passion is, it's an interesting passion, right? For a lot of people, if they look at it, they go, whoa, that's a lot. But you teach people about living, about dying well, but also about really living well. And I have listened to so many of your podcasts, and every single one of them has golden nuggets in it that I have really taken to heart and then watching this number 6 of Limitless, and you putting Chris through that experience. I would just say to everybody, schedule right now a couple hours so that you can go watch this particular episode with Dr. BJ Miller. I watched all the other ones, but episode 6 obviously made the biggest impact on me. So I would love for them to get to know a little bit about you and just who you are, what you stand for in the world. I know that it all started in a way that you didn't expect your path to probably go, right? You were
Mhm.
on your way. Maybe share a little bit about your backstory.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Lauren. It's really a pleasure to be with you, you Spitfire. It's wonderful to be with you. Thank you. So thanks for having me. Um, I grew up in the Midwest, and I grew up the son of a disabled mom, and I've been around sort of bodily difference my whole life. And then it came my turn. When I was 19, I was in sophomore in college out east and screwing around on a commuter train and had a metal watch on my wrist and got close enough to the power source and the electricity arc to the watch and whammo. So that landed me very close to death. And so that was my big brush with death, the thing that kind of what I call the cosmic spanking, the thing that kind of just woke me up. And then, yeah, then I ended up
Well, I have a
losing
question
both.
about that. I'm going to go back.
Sure,
I'm
sure.
going to go back if you don't mind, because I understand
Sure,
you weren't
sure.
alone. You were with your friends,
Yeah.
right? You were
Yep.
with a couple buddies. And so
Yep.
you're 19 years old, right? Doing what 19-year-old kids do. It's interesting because I was a cheerleader. I know it's hard to believe, but I was a cheerleader in high school. And we had buddies, and my buddy, he actually was doing a project in college, and he had to climb I think he climbed a telephone pole and had to hide something. And he as well was hit, and they had to take graft his hand to his belly and like everything grow in. But what I'm just curious about your buddies, like what happened when they saw that happen to you? What impact did it make on their lives? I know what impact it made in your life, but I'm just curious, did it get them to also wake up, right? Because lots of times people wake up, but then they fall back asleep. So what impact did it have on them?
I love you for asking that question, Lauren. I feel myself going down my kind of rote answer to this big question. And the truth is, thanks to that night, so many things happen, and not just for me. As you know, we're not walking around in little automaton vacuums. We affect each other and we go through things together. And in this case, there was a foursome. I was lucky in college. We had some beautiful friendships. And this night called into account those friendships, called them to account. A lot of people responded. But most specifically, there were three guys: Tommy, Jonathan, and Pete. And the four of us rode crew together. That's how we met freshman year and became immediately very close. And we're just basically inseparable. I can't remember if we called ourselves this or people called us this, the Fearsome Foursome. It was just our whatever. We kind of cheesy bunch of dudes who didn't mind showing the world how much they loved each other. It was it was very sweet, I have to say. We had a really beautiful thing. So sophomore fall, Pete and Jonathan were with me that night. Tommy had some studying to do, but Pete and Jonathan were with me that night. And those guys learned. I mean, they're so they didn't see what happened. I was the first one to climb on top of the train. They just heard an explosion, and so when Pete got up behind me, he saw me lying there and still looked like he thought maybe I was dead. There was this huge explosion, smoke going all over the place, and I flew back, I don't know how many feet, and landed on top of the train, was bleeding from my head. But Pete got up on top of this train, this electrified train, still electrified, great risk to himself. Jonathan went and called 911. Pete got up on top of the train and, essentially sort of shook me, and I came to, and I just apparently just started freaking out, flailing around, punching him, just huge surges of adrenaline, which apparently is pretty common because you still have all this heat running around inside of you. It's not a pleasant thing. But anyway, kind of getting out of the weeds a little bit. So these guys, so Pete stayed with me on top of the train until the paramedics came. But no fault to them. They wouldn't get up on top of the train. It was too risky. So there was a police officer Dawson, who became Sergeant Dawson. He got up on top of the train. So he and Pete put me in the stretcher and lowered me down. Then off I went to the first hospital, then a helicopter to the burn unit, and off I went. So, but that's sort of just logistics. I know your question's a bigger one than that, Lauren. So these guys directly help.
It's interesting though. It's interesting though that you say that, because I mean, I just took a ton of notes just on what you just said. The fact that you were known, whether it was your thing or that you guys made it, and that it was that you were known as the Fearsome Foursome, the power of community that you just talked about, you know, and you and I were just talking of what people are hungry for. I mean, how important that is when times are good, right? Like when you're having fun and you're being playful, and then that your friend just said, look, whatever it is, I'm going up there and I'm helping my friend, right?
Yeah.
So I want people to really get the messages throughout everything that you're sharing with regards to, or the officer who said, I'm going, this is just what I do. I'm not running away from the situation.
Yes.
So anyway.
Yeah, thank you, Lauren. It was beautiful to, and sort of a meta theme. So these guys, the burn unit in Livingston, New Jersey, about 45 minutes away from Princeton. These guys showed up every day for months, even when you weren't able to come into the burn unit. So even when they couldn't see me, they showed up. So I knew they were there. I'm gonna start crying here thinking about it. Wow, I haven't talked about those guys in a while in this way, but they showed up for me. They showed up for my parents, and they showed up for each other. And they also helped organize a blood drive so that I got my blood from people I knew, and all sorts of beautiful things, all sorts of unsung things, daily things. Can imagine what this did to their college experience. Our innocence kind of went out the window in one night, but they responded without bitterness or resentment. They wanted to be there. And this is such a big part of the story, Lauren. It's taken me many, many years, decades, to actually feel like I have felt like I owed these guys. I do owe these guys, but I have felt this weight of debt to them, and that I had took so much from them just to survive, and so much of their energy and so much of their care and concern when they could have been doing fun things. And I had felt really guilty about that. And we finally have talked about it. And to a person now just looked at me like, what are you, nuts? Like, no, man, we wanted to be there. And we wanted to show you we loved you. And we learned things, it was not this selfless act on their part and a selfish act on my part. These were people who loved each other, going through life and doing what needed to be done for each other. And we all grew from it. I think they would also tell you they learned lessons from this. We grew up pretty quickly. And I hear them talk to their children now and how they talk about that experience. And I get to see now how this very painful act also begat all sorts of beauty that I don't think we would have ever seen. People are walking around with all sorts of heroes inside of them that just don't get expressed. This was a moment that summoned their compassion that I wouldn't have necessarily had an excuse to see. But I gave them an excuse to show it, and they really showed it, and it was so, so beautiful. Oh my Lord.
That is so gorgeous that people are walking around with heroes inside of them waiting to be. It's so true, right? I mean, we don't realize that those moments, I don't know. I think that those moments where you really do show up, and then you're like, oh, I didn't, it's like the whole, what is it? There's a book, it's called The Prayer of Jabez, and it says, God bless me indeed. And the second line of the Prayer of Jabez is an expand my territory. But that doesn't mean it's always going to be good, right? It doesn't always, same thing. When I was 18 in college, I lost my best friend. He was born 2 weeks, before I was. And in Judaism, we bring people together because, as you know, they bury the next day. And my dad was over Thanksgiving, and my dad was trying to get this called whatever you call it, I forgot, I'm a bad Jew, that you bring everybody together because you're supposed to sit with the body until the body is buried. And I saw my dad calling people, just trying to get a hold of them on Thanksgiving, and nobody wanted to go. And here I am, 18 years old. I'm like, I'll go, Dad. And I went, and it was hard. An 18-year-old sitting, with one of your best friends. You're sitting Shiva before, and I went and I showed up, and I was alone, just with my friend. But what was so beautiful, and the reason I'm bringing this up is, guess what?
all of my friends start showing up. And then just that, like you said, like in, living well, but also that was a beautiful honor, I think, for him. His name was Michael, but also being able to know that even in the passing, that we were all still there to support, And then, the same thing, I lost a friend, my freshman year again, girl that passed away in a car accident. And I think that everybody was like, is she going to be able to make it through? She's probably going to drop out of school. I'm sure people thought that for you too, right?
Yeah.
Did a lot of people think, oh gosh, she's not going to go on in college and continue on? What happened? Yeah. I'm just curious.
Yeah, no, I got one of the things, and maybe it's changed. I got injured, this is 1990, right when the Americans with Disabilities Act was coming out. So policy and culture were shifting on this point. So it was a little different time, but not much different. But a lot of people, a lot of what you find when you land yourself in the shoes of disability is you get a lot of pity and a lot of people giving you a pass, often well-intended. But what they're basically doing is inviting you to get out of the realm of normal life, treating you as special, and I thanks to my mom, I never really quite took that bait. So there was, we don't need to go back to school. We'll take care of you or whatever. It was just sort of this presumption that now the expectations for you should be way lower for your life and that you're going to be dependent on the kindness of others and, poor thing. So that point, there's a lot of corrosion that happens from that sort of pity stuff. And even my parents heard from friends of theirs while I was touch and go in the hospital. A few people encouraged my parents to let me go, to let me die, that it would be so horrible and demoralizing to live with amputations, that better to let me die. That my parents fielded some of that kind of stuff. So, but you quickly kind of learn that you're provoking sides of people. We just talked about the heroic side, but you're also provoking others, unsavory sides of other people. Yeah. Pity chief among them.
And their fears, right? Like their fears going up, their fears going, oh, well, I could never be able to survive, to be able to do that. So what did it provoke in you? Did it provoke, well, I'll show you? Did it provoke
a little bit?
What happened? Yeah.
Well, a little bit, Lauren. As I was just saying that, I realized, as annoying as that is on some level, it's demeaning on some level. It also lowers the bar and lowers expectations. And I am wired such that I don't thrive under big expectations. If someone expects little of me, that's when I tend to really, something about that dynamic frees me up to try or something. I have little to lose or something. And so in some ways, that was the kind favor that everyone did for me, because it freed me up to say, wow, gosh, no expectations. People are going to applaud me for going to the bathroom and back. Great. So that prompted me to say, well, let's see. Maybe I'll go to med school. Maybe I'll be a doctor. Maybe I'll aim really high. Just why not? Got nothing to lose, and no one's watching. So it really that low expectation. What did George W. say? Sort of the indignity of low expectations or something like that. One of the more inspired things I heard him say. But that was true too. There was an indignity of low expectations that provoked in me a little bit of, oh yeah, well, watch this.
Yeah. And then when you did, and then, you could have gone into any kind of medicine. What was it about palliative care that made you, obviously with your own experience, but you didn't have to go there. That's pretty, after already experiencing it personally, you could have chosen anything to do. What about that made you go into palliative care?
Well, I'll back up just 2 steps to say, like, when I went back to college, so my first like, oh yeah, I'll show you, was to try to graduate with my class, was to go back and get complete coursework that I had missed, get back with my class and graduate on time. That was the first, like, oh yeah, watch this. And that really propelled me, because that got me back into my community. That got me in my class with my classmates. That was a huge, powerful force that willed me forward. And then the other thing was, I decided to study art and art history. It was when I changed my major on a hunch. And that proved to be extremely valuable for me. Essentially, we can talk about it in more detail, but essentially what I learned by learning about art, I learned to see. I learned how to see. I learned perspective, essentially. And perspective making has proven to be the most powerful tool I've ever stumbled on. How we frame things, how we contextualize things, how we see things changes what we see. And so with that, armed with that, and then I graduated and I had no friggin' idea what I was going to do for a living. I was just trying to get through the day. Then medicine lit up as, well, gosh, I knew I wanted to use my experiences as a source of power, meaning, and something good, not something to overcome. I was not going to put these injuries behind me. I wanted to work with them. They were too powerful, too big, too useful. And so medicine lit up as this way. Gosh, man, that would be amazing if a doctor had walked into my room when I was in the burn unit looking like me. I would have been just, no matter what the guy had said, that would have been therapeutic for me to see.
Yeah.
And so that was much the hunch, is to use this in a theatrical way to some degree, use it as a symbolic thing. And that willed me into medicine. And then palliative care. So I thought I would do rehab medicine, work with other folks who just had an injury, because I wasn't into it for a love of medicine. I was into learn medicine as a bag of tricks to apply to people to be in service. And then deep in med school, I fell out of love with rehab medicine. It was just too mechanical. I realized I was into it for much more for the spiritual and philosophical aspects. Like, what is it that humans do when they can't control something? What is it when we butt up against something out of our control? Rehab medicine and lesson medicine is always kind of looking for things that we can control. I'm much more interested in what do you do when you can't? And so and then I was going to drop out of medicine. I had learned from coming close to death that I'm not going to sign up to this willfully sacrifice my life doing something I don't care about. And so when I was going to disillusion with medicine, my dean convinced me to, obviously I was going to graduate. I was a senior in med school, so I was going to get it done. She's like, well, just do an internship. Just do your first year of residency, because then you can get your license as a general practitioner. And if you ever really want to jump back in medicine, it's easier to do so. So then I went back home. My parents were in Milwaukee at that point. I went back there. I said, okay, I'll do my internship in Milwaukee, hang out with mom and dad. It'd been a while. So did that, and then stumbled onto an elective of palliative care. I had heard about it, but I thought I knew what I was going to do. So I didn't really pay attention. I thought I was going to rehab. Anyway, I did this elective in palliative care, and within the first half day, I was sold. This was the field where, and so finally getting to your question, Lauren, thanks for your patience, but like, why palliative care? Well, so first of all, for your audience, guys, so palliative care is a fast growing field within healthcare, but as in a field, it's only official subspecialty in medicine since 2006. And the field is called hospice and palliative medicine. And palliative care grew out of hospice. So we do a lot of end of life care, but palliative care is the bigger sort of cousin of hospice, which is simply the interdisciplinary work of promoting quality of life. And we treat suffering rather than we treat it in a disease. We treat the experience of suffering. And our endpoint is not survivorship per se. Our endpoint is something more like joy or coming to terms with reality. These are different endpoints within the science of medicine, you can imagine. So anyway, there's a lot to say about palliative care and how it's different. But to answer your question, I fell in love with this field that was devoted to the subjective sense, devoted to this thing that everybody does. Everybody who's ever lived and ever will live most likely suffers, gets sick, comes into contact with things they can't control, and ultimately will die. And that universality was so appealing to me, to work on something that actually connects us all, that we all must deal with. That was a big, big thing I fell in love with. And then lastly was just simply that this was a spiritual, philosophical pursuit. I wasn't going to be fixing anybody. I was going to be accompanying people who were unfixable. And that to me is a very beautiful enterprise, because I had felt that on the receiving end. So off I went.
And I love it. There's so much to unpack. You saw me, I don't know if you saw me taking notes, but there's so much, and it's just so beautiful. So, and I would say, like when I was watching Limitless, I mean, some parts were like, wow, that was hard. Like there was a lot of things to think about, and watching it. And I remember when my father was in hospice care, I'm so grateful for the hospice team that was there to support my dad. And I remember I was like, I want to go and help out in some way. And they said, well, first of all, you need to make sure you deal with your own stuff. Don't too many people, I guess, want to jump in and volunteer and then bring their own stuff, like, right. Unfortunately, way. But there's a couple things that you said. One was the thing about perspective. I mean, one of my most favorite quotes is Wayne Dyer, right? When you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. So for you, in perspective, just with regards to, you know, you talk a lot about allowing yourself to be a work in progress. I know that's a big thing that you talk about. What changed when you did give yourself permission to be a work in progress?
Oh, well, so many, it's such a sweet kind of, it just depressurizes me, you know, to this, that it helps ease the perfectionist in me. It helps ease my really gnarly self-critic. Just to simply say, which seems to be stating the obvious, that we are continuously learning. We are continuously in formation and deformation. You know, life is inherently dynamic. Stability itself, or stillness itself, is something of an illusion. Things are always in motion. I don't just mean the planets, but we are relational beings. And so we are in a dynamic relationship with everything, including ourselves. So things are inherently in process, and things are inherently becoming. And I love the truth of that. So I love it because it, like I say, it helps me get out of bed and approach life and not feel terrible about all the things I haven't yet figured out, but yet instead be curious about those things. Where can I go today? What can I learn today? Oh, I screwed that up. What would I do different next time? It's just this, it really is such a sweet, it's like I'm treating myself like I would treat nursery school kids. You know, there's no dumb questions. You can't make mistakes. You'll learn something, you know. I'm just treating myself in that same way. And it's a kinder way to go through life. And like I said, it's also more accurate. Right. We are never done. So why pretend to be?
So funny, like, you know, when we were at dinner and you and I we were talking, I think, of both of our love for nature and getting back to nature and realizing that we are nature. And a big thing that I love that you kept talking about was surrendering to the flow of life and finding wisdom in daily life that's right there in front of us. And so many of us are missing out. We're missing out on life, right? Because we are so focused on what's not right, or what do people think, or everything. And, you know, it was interesting when my daughter met you, she's like, God, he's just such a cool guy. You can just feel his energy, right? And just to hear my 16-year-old, you know, want to know more about like you and what drives you. And so she went and did her own homework on her own, just about you. And it's like, wow, Mom, he just really loves life. And he puts it in perspective with regards to just being more present. What she got from, you know, just meeting you for 15 minutes was just being present, right? And just loving the heck out of it. And you also said something else. You talked about the uncertainty, you know, that people are always looking for certainty. Tony Robbins always says, you know, the quality of your life is not how much certainty you can handle. The quality of your life is how much uncertainty you can handle. And, you know, how you just talk about the meaning that you gave this whole situation. What would you say to people with regards to, I don't know, just viewing life and just viewing death as well? Like, what would you say to people right now?
Well, I think for starters, I would just do what you've implied earlier in our conversation, but let's just state it outright, which is death is entirely, squarely part of life, inseparable from life. And that very simple, very observably true statement, a lot flows from that. If you watch our language, you know, succumb to illness, lost the battle, all this stuff implies that death is this foreign invader coming to get you. this reaper that's lurking out there somewhere. It's coming for you someday. And of course, that's terrifying. It sounds terrifying. If it were true, that'd be one thing. But it isn't even true. Anything by virtue of being born will die. It's just part of the deal. This is sort of a dialectic that we live with. We rise and we fall. We come and we go. And yes, through spirit or through the world of emotion or psyche, or depending on your belief system, there are also these things that continue on that precede us, that go through us and postcede us. So there is a force that is immortal, but it's not any one being. Life keeps going, but our lives stop. And so that forces us to see ourselves as part of something larger. And therein is so much therapeutic value in that statement. So one thing to say is to circle back, death is part of life. If you want to be at odds with death, you're going to be at odds with life. I'm not saying you got to love death. That's asking a little bit much. Yeah. But this is a Rilke quote that I live by, which is like, no, that the request is to love life fully enough, completely love life, that you automatically rope death into your love. That's a paraphrase of a quote of his, which really for me is something of a gospel. And I remind myself of that all the time. And I remind my patients and clients of that all the time. So that's a big one. Yeah. Seeing these things as inseparable. So you're not at odds with yourself unnecessarily.
It's interesting. I don't know if you remember when we were together as well. I shared with you, somebody asked me my name or how I got my name. And I was sharing with you all that I'm named after my grandfather, and that my mom was pregnant with me, and that in Judaism we don't name anybody juniors or seniors because it's like jinxing. But it when I look at it, I'm the circle of life, right? Like my grandfather passed, and after he passed, then I was born a couple months later, right? But that's the beauty. That is the circle. I'm just a continuing part of just who he was, you know, except a lot shorter because he was really tall, and so I was definitely not that. But the other thing that I love that you said, like you said, we rise and we fall. So I know that, let's talk a little bit about mental health, because I think it's extraordinary everything that you're doing with mental health. Let's talk about what that is and why you created that.
So Mettle Health, METTLE, Mettle. It's a word that I love this word. I mean, it just basically refers to, a person's mettle, their inner strength, their reserve, their resiliency. It's a beautiful word, and it's a beautiful thing. And it's a little bit like we were just saying about death being contained within life. We all have in us this life force, this strength. It's not necessarily something we have to go looking out there for and acquire. Each of us has some life force in us that is a source of strength, especially if it can meet the right circumstances to reveal itself, like we were talking earlier. So I love the notion of mettle, and my job is not to somehow bestow strength on you by teaching you a couple skill sets so that you can acquire strength. My job would be to evince from you the things that you can rely on, your own inner strengths. Those come from you, not from me bestowing them on you. That's another way that we upend traditional medicine, where the doctor is really this guy who comes along and bestows some healing medicine or intervention on you. Our work is to pull these things out of you that are inside you. So anyway, that's the name. That's our name, Mettle Health. We may need to change it. It confuses the hell out of people, but for now we love it.
But I love it now that I really understand why it's metal. It's like you said, now I understand the meaning with regards to it. And how are some of those ways? I know there's some ways that you like to help people kind of like unleash that. What are some of the things that you do?
Well, so it's, for us, our process is one of, it might smell a little bit like therapy. Most of it is talking. If you are our client, Lauren, you would come. We're a virtual company. We're telemedicine, and our model is different. We can talk about how it's different from the rest of healthcare, but it gets kind of wonky. But our model is a social model. So I'm a physician, But if in Mettle, I'm not becoming your doctor. I'm coaching you how to use your doctor carefully, how to navigate this unintuitive healthcare system, how to protect yourself as you move through very difficult things. So, so we have this degree of remove. We're coaching you. We're not becoming your clinical team, and that gives us a degree of freedom together to talk about just about anything. A lot of those sessions with our clients, sometimes it's with the family member or caregiver, sometimes it's with the patient, and sometimes it's with people, our clients aren't even sick. They're just having an existential crisis and trying to find meaning again in their lives. So people come to us for all sorts of reasons. But one thing you'll hear people say is that we're a really safe place to fall apart. I think you go and you don't know where it's safe to be vulnerable in this world. And that's our first order of business.
A lot of people are feeling that right now. That's why I really wanted you to be the first guest back after my little hiatus for a month. Was I think that was the thing that my Snoopy ears went up and said, we have to talk about that. So let's dive a little bit deeper, because you've seen a lot of what's especially happened over the past couple of years, and why mental health is so important now more than ever, right? So can you dive into that?
So, I think a lot of what happens, I think you could say that we've just been living through a massive existential crisis in the form of a pandemic. You could also relate it to our politics and climate issues and all sorts of challenges that we're living with these days. Massive, massive structural systems challenges. Put them all together one way or another, pick any of those crises, and they have a way of shaking us down to our foundations. The things we thought were real are not. The things we thought were stable turn out to be liquid. The things the jobs that we thought would go forever are not. So all sorts of crumbling. It's a time of deconstruction. And that is inherently unstable. And then can be very frightening. The things that we use for our points of identity. I know I'm BJ because certain things treat me a certain way, and I look a certain way, and I can look around, I get my bearings, I can orient in my life. Now with the world crumbling and shaking, it's very hard to orient. It's very hard to get your bearings. And questions like, who am I, start coming up again. And even if you can get past the who am I questions, like, well, now what do I want to do? It turns out the thing I thought was so meaningful ain't so meaningful anymore. Yeah. So one is to have a safe place to capture people where they really feel held and they need to trust you. And that is job one. We need a sacred place for people to land in all their bits and pieces. And then in that process, we can lovingly call attention to what's been lost and grieve that. Very important is grieving. It doesn't just happen in an instant. So let the feelings come, feel the feelings, be with them. Sit with the pain a little bit. Don't fill these holes that just opened up, the spaces that just opened up, the emptiness that just opened up. Let it be empty. Sit with that. There's a clever phrase in psychology, sort of the presence of the absence. Be with the presence of the thing that's no more. Grieve that. Give it a moment. That's a big part of the process. Then next would be something like, all right, wow. Now let's see here. What's still left? What do I still have? Who, when I look at myself in the mirror, when I look at my bank account, when I look at my life, what do I still have? And then reorient to the life that is continuing. Now that you've done a little bit of grieving, what's no more. And then our process would be to just be so honest with this person, because there's a muscle memory that, you hear this talk of kind of going back to normal. Oh, now that the pandemic's kind of receding, we're going to go back to normal. No, first of all, there's no such thing as going back. Second of all, this is normal. Pandemics, illness, death, this is part of normal. You've got an incomplete worldview if the way you see life does not include calamity. Then you're missing out. Okay. So this is life. So you got to kind of get to that place too, that this is not an anomaly. This isn't a detour. This is the deal. And then you can kind of de-shame things. This is normal. It's not something wrong with you for being broken. Life breaks us. This is normal. You're okay. And so you've got the raw material, which you still have. You have the companionship and the mirroring and the witnessing with us as counseling you to tell you that you're here and you're okay. and to deputize, to kind of jump back into your life, to bless that idea that we're going to reconstruct now. And so then we set about kind of reforming ourselves with this new way, in this new reality, this new changing reality. And then eventually we head back into the world and make it so. So those are for our clients who have some time left on the planet. If you're one of our clients who is very near the end, then it's much the same process, but instead of going back out the world to make it so in an indefinite way, you're doing so with what time you have. But there's this added piece too. We amplify the piece, all the stuff that you let go of and can't control, and normalize the hell out of that, and help contextualize that as nature doing natural things. You are a natural critter. So you are melting back into the earth just like all of us will do, and will become other things energetically at the very least. And to kind of come to terms with that. So it depends what you're seeking with us, Lauren. We may go a couple different ways, but that's something of the big picture of how we move with people.
How many? I've got 7 pages of notes, just FYI. I love what you said. Sacred place for people, the land. I mean, there's a couple things I have. I look at my dad. Like when my dad graduated, I remember going on a walk with my dad, and he and this was before anything. Life was good. Moving on, and he said, "I've had a great life. I have seen my kids get married. I have grandchildren." I'm like, "Dad, don't say that." It was my fears that were coming out. It wasn't him. He goes, "No, you don't get it, Lauren. I've had a really good life." And this was maybe 4 or 5 years even before he passed. And so he was very like, "I'm good." How much do you see it's not so much even the person that is at that next phase, but the family? Like, I know my dad held on, he was in a coma, but I know he was holding on not for him. I mean, he was holding on for us so that we could go through. Like, I wish that during that process that we had Mettle, to be able to go to and go, okay, help us through this, because it was our own fears were coming up. It was our attachment to how life was, like you said, instead of just understanding the big picture. What percentage would you say are is that what I just shared?
Yeah, I'd say in my experience, the majority of family situations meet that description. And not just families by blood, but networks, groups of people. We are social critters one way or another. Some of us, like myself included, that includes socializing with other animals besides humans too. I've watched my own dog grieve. I've grieved my dog. I mean, so anyway, so let's just say that within groups of living creatures, this is a dynamic. You just named it, a very common dynamic. So if I think a lot of the neuroses around death are born by those of us who are on the planet for an indefinite time yet. Living is the harder thing in a way than dying per se. I watched and very often, whether it was in my work here or at UCSF for years, at some point, especially if the person is living with a chronic illness and therefore has time to kind of wrap their head around what's happening, versus like a spontaneous death. I was alive walking around one day and then I just dropped dead. That doesn't happen much anymore. The majority of us die of chronic illnesses. And so that means we have time to kind of be with the thing that's going to event our death. And we can get used to it to some degree. And there's something that nature does with the body that, as the body declines from a functional point of view, our spirit and our emotional lives can rise, can ascend. And the body, in a way, what it helps us do is by kind of falling apart piecemeal, it kind of sets us up to let go of it. And so I don't know if this is the case with your dad, but one way or another, as you get closer to death, it can be even a source of relief.
Yes.
Living's hard. And so I've watched a lot of people make their way through accepting their mortality, even welcoming it, not in a pathological death wishy kind of way, but this sort of, I think what I would imagine your dad was feeling like, hey, this is part of life. I've had a really
Yep.
good life. I love
Yeah.
you. I know I'm
Yeah.
loved. Hey,
Yeah.
I'm okay.
Yeah.
I don't mean to put words in his mouth and your mouth, but I'm assuming, is that an accurate kind of?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. And so then
Yeah.
the work then becomes the family then becomes the focus of a lot of this work because they've got to keep on living. And so very often our work segues onto the family, and including into the grief process.
And that's a big thing as well, right? So that's
Yeah.
what Mettle does. Mettle is a
Yeah.
resource for people. That's why this was so important for me to do this podcast with you. So let's talk about that. So let's talk about the grief process, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because a lot of times I would say you can't skip a stage, and people try to skip a stage.
Mm-hmm.
So people are like, I'm good, I'm all good, I'm just gonna power through. Can you talk a little bit about the grief stage and why it's so important?
Yeah. So I learned that the hard way. I was, sort of a typical American, I guess, in some ways, typical American male, maybe, I don't know. But the idea of grief that I had kind of absorbed when I was younger was that if you're really strong, like you get back up on the horse, keep on riding. This is, it's sort of an extreme version of death being part of, like, yeah, this is life, kid. Get it, keep going, keep moving. Yeah, go on now. Like, and I didn't give the loss. I thought the game was to move on as quickly as possible. That showed strength. That was blah blah blah. What a farce. I tried to do that, but I just watched. Like you said, you can't skip these things. Grief came around and bit me in the butt many times because I kept trying to short circuit it. And I did the same with my sister's death 22 years ago. And it was really through working with patients and watching them grieve that I learned that this was an essential process, that I was doing myself no favors by short circuiting it. Because what I was doing, let's say in the most obvious cases with my sister, um, I did not let myself think about her much because it was too painful. And I thought, so I would just distract myself, keep moving, distract, sublimate any feelings into something else. And what I realized I was doing, among other things, was cutting myself off from her memory.
Yeah.
I couldn't think of her. And so I was killing, to be dramatic, but I was killing the residual relationship that was accessible to me, her memory, her spirit. And it was years later that I let myself formally grieve her. And that reopened, I got to have a relationship with her again. So that was thanks to grief. And also the true, fuller sense of reality. What I lost with her, but what I also gained with her came into view because I could look at it. I could withstand the feelings. I could live with the feelings. The feelings weren't the enemy anymore. Sadness wasn't an enemy anymore. So I've come to see grief as an absolutely essential human endeavor, almost like a metabolic process of how we metabolize or digest the hard truths of loss and the stunning news that other things keep going on. And that's a real mind, bender. And unless you give thank you. I'm sorry, I almost went another word there. But unless you give yourself that transition period, that time to be altered, to be drunk with loss, to feel weird and out of sorts, to be true to the reality that just got shaken up, that I would love us as a society to embrace grief like older societies have.
Yeah.
Mark it with an armband or hang crepe or something to let each other know, hey, I'm in grief. I'm altered. I'm in an altered state. I'll be out the backside. I'm here. We're going to be okay. But you don't ask as much from someone who's in grief. They don't ask as much from themselves, not pretending to be in a normal state. So anyway, there's a lot to say about grief. I'm a huge fan of it.
It's so interesting. And once again, I'm so grateful for the strong foundation that I've had, just like as I share with you, like whether it's sitting Shiva or covering your mirrors or like you said, like wearing, when they come up at the funeral and they rip the little black tie that you have on, you're like, wow, okay, there's a part of me. life is going to be different. But I love what you said, that feeling where enemy is not the where feelings are not the enemy. Where feelings were not the enemy anymore. I love that. It was so beautiful. I could talk to you forever. So talk with me a little bit more, so people can just go to Mettle. If they want to find out more, if they know somebody that, or even themselves, that they've got some healing to do.
Absolutely. Please. Yes. Mettle Health, METTLE, mettlhealth.com. And don't have to overthink. I mean, we're a social service. We pulled ourselves out of healthcare in the medical soup. So insurance doesn't cover what we do. And that does mean it's out of pocket, but we have a sliding scale and we do everything we can to make it affordable. But that also means you don't need a referral. You don't need to overthink whether or not you would fit with us. Just come see us and do a little 20-minute freebie to see if it feels right. We have webinars that we do most months for free. There are other ways to dip your toe into our community. So please come see us and don't overthink whether or not you can use some extra support. A lot of people wait way too long to get a little help. And when there's a lot of comfort waiting for you, there's some peace waiting for you.
And I mean, how many times have you seen where people didn't go get the help and maybe it did show up physically in their own challenges that they have in their life?
Oh, for sure. I mean, you just can't get away with short circuiting these things. They will bite you one way or another, whether it's grief or just turning your attention to your own life. It will come around. So, I mean, I think one of the things I see again and again is, whether by force or by choice, when people turn their attention to these fuller realities in which they exist, of which they are part, it can be hard to look at these things. It can be difficult, to know how. But when people do, not only do they sort of mitigate future problems for themselves in a lot of ways by being a little bit more tuned into themselves, but it has a way, death has a way of shining a lot of light on the present moment. The idea that I'm not going to be here forever is very much the thing that lights me up to get out of bed, to take advantage of this day. So what's waiting for a lot of us who are suffering through illness or grief or isolation, whatever it is, by going into that stuff, yes, it's sad, and yes, it's also where you start seeing these fuller, more beautiful truths. And your daily life, you will be rewarded in your daily life now, not in some future state. People who turn their attention and wrap their heads around their mortality earlier in life, for example, tend to lead a fuller, richer, better life because of it.
Yeah. I think, like you said, like that for me, like everybody's like, oh my gosh, you've got so much going on. I go, because I want to live fully, I want to just I want to drink it all up as much as I can. Right. So yeah, I celebrate it. I celebrate the craziness. I celebrate all my projects. I saw it. So speaking of which, tell us about this amazing event that's going to be happening in Nevada City.
Oh yeah, thanks, Lauren. I almost forgot. Yeah, so we have been we're going about 3 years old now. We started in the pandemic. Mettle was a response to the pandemic. We needed to lower the bar. People needed direct care now, a safe place to fall apart now. So anyway, we're pandemic babies. And in August 17th in Nevada City, California, a beautiful town in the Sierra foothills, we're going to be having our first in-person event. So to date, we've had some 600 some clients so far, and it's all been digital. We've gotten incredible intimacy happens in these conversations, but we've never met each other in a lot of ways. So we're going to have this in-person event and break out of the digital plane and get together in the fleshy bits. So we're going to have a day-long event in Nevada City. It's going to be fun. It's going to be intimate. It's in this beautiful old little theater. It's sort of down home, sweet little town. It's not going to be super polished. It's going to be raw, like we like it, and just like life is. And there's a day of speakers. We kick it off with Michael Murphy, who's an amazing architect. Because one of the things we believe in strongly, that the environment of care really, really matters. The aesthetic domain really, really matters from a therapeutic standpoint. How beauty itself has a therapeutic quality to it. So we want to, as an organization, we want to open up the idea that architecture and design and the arts have something to offer feeling better in this life. We have Karen Skanke talking about sexuality and intimacy in the setting of illness. One of the first things that tends to go out the window in the setting of big time illness can be sexuality, and that's a unfortunate, unnecessary death. There are ways to stay sexually active, or at least sensually active, all the way through. We'll talk about that. Got patients and their caregivers showing up to talk to us about how it affects the whole family. Anyway, so it's a loaded day, well beyond the typical medical conference. This is meant for lay people and clinicians too. But the idea here is going to show up and be a human being, no matter what your role is.
And it's for everybody, honestly.
It's for everybody.
I think it's for everybody.
Totally,
right?
totally, everybody.
I mean, you're going to walk away. I mean, just us talking about it a couple of weeks ago, I was like, oh my gosh, everybody should attend this. Right?
Oh yeah,
I really do believe it. And I know it's limited in space, in a beautiful space. And Nevada City's just cool. I don't know if anybody's ever been there. If you haven't been in Nevada City, you need to go there, and you need to go meet BJ anyway, just to be there. No, I'm serious. Everybody can tell you. I'm not going to say it unless I really, really believe it. So
Thank you,
are a very special man. I'm beyond grateful, to that you were brought into my life. Question. What's one thing that you do to stay true to yourself every day?
Well, for me, I think the answer is I spend a little bit or a lot of time alone one way or another. With the projections of others, my desire to be with others and to be what other people want me to be and need to be, I can get yanked to the edges of my authentic self sometimes if I'm not careful. And so finding some time, some silence with myself. It would have been with my dog Maisie, but she just died, let's say several weeks ago. And so I really miss her terribly. My answer would have been spending time with Maisie in this wordless place where, you know how a dog looks at you lovingly, but they're not pretending you're something you're not either. So, that was how I stayed real, was time within a wordless space with the animals. And now it's a wordless space by myself out in the woods. I'm looking at a hummingbird out my window right now. So I think my answer to your question, Lauren, as I kind of fumble, as I think out loud with you, is I go be amongst nature. And nature's big enough to hold everything, including death, including embarrassment, including decay. And so I feel quite at home when I'm in the natural world. And that's where I check myself.
Because we are nature, right?
We are nature, Mama.
We forget that.
Amen.
So I was just sharing with you that I listened to a lot during that mandatory pause was Dr. Zach Bush. And he said, Mother Nature, there's a reason she's called Mother Nature. She's crying for us to get out there and be with her and give us our challenges, give us our give it all to her, because she can handle it. Like you just said, she can handle it. If you just trust it, she's ready. She's ready to move. She's ready to wrap her arms around you. Well, you are an amazing man. I can't wait for whatever we do together. I know that there's something we're going to be doing together.
Me too.
And you are very special. So how else can people get a hold of you? Is it Mettle, or how can they find out about the event as well?
I'll go to mettlehealth.com. There's on the banner, you should see it right away. There's a place to click to see the invite to the event. Please come on and join us. It will be fun, I guarantee you, and it will be educational too. And then I'm also, you can check out my book, A Beginner's Guide to the End, that I co-wrote with Shoshana Berger. That's put out by Simon & Schuster. You could find me at Twitter, I guess, at BJ Miller MD. And you can find us on Instagram at Mettle Health.
I'm committed to get you out there more. More people are going to find out about you and just like how awesome you are. I don't know how it's going to be. I'm going to introduce you to everybody that I know, because you're the kind of people that I truly believe it's people like you that are really going to give people that peace and that just of enjoying life more and embracing more and living well. And that's really what it's about. So I know that I even just our little bit of time together, that's how I feel with you. So make sure to share this podcast with everybody that you know. Make sure you tell everybody about Mettle Health and about all of his event that's coming up. And I'm sure there's more wonderful things to come. So I look forward to seeing you in Utah.
Oh, Lauren, you're awesome, sweetheart. Thank you so much. It's such a pleasure being with you. And thank you for the encouragement in my work. I really, really appreciate it. Yes, Mom, I will see you in Utah. Big old smile.
How awesome was today? Make sure you subscribe to the podcast and invite your friends to join as well. I'm here for you with fabulous content, great guests, and lots of giveaways. To learn more of how I have taken what I've learned, applied it to my life, helped others find their true voice, text TRUE to 26786, which will give you my top tune-ups and a complimentary 15-minute discovery call with one of our coaches. And remember, keep in touch with me on Instagram at I am Lauren Lahav, Facebook Lauren Lahav Official, Clubhouse Lauren Lahav. Make sure you text TRUE, TRUE, to 26786. Text TRUE, TRUE, to 26786. And remember to always stay true to the amazing person you are.